Hola, ¿qué tal? Bienvenido. My name is John Edwards, and I'm going to be moderating this session, The Challenge of Compliance, the Perspective of Data Protection Officers. With massive fines, reputational risk, and brand value on the line, it takes a lot of responsibility rests on the shoulders of data protection officers. What does it take to be a successful DPO? Where should a DPO be in an organization? To whom should they report? What is the value of contracting out DPO services as opposed to maintaining an in-house capability? What about the challenge of locating the necessary multidisciplinary skill set in one person? Does a DPO need to be a data scientist, an expert in AI and encryption, a lawyer qualified in all the jurisdictions the company operates in? Is it the DPO who is responsible for determining whether that new processing is a legitimate interest? The promotional for this session promises to cover the questions: what are the challenges facing technologies that make intensive use of personal data? What are the challenges of adapting a data protection model to multiple jurisdictions and regulations? What obstacles must they overcome to enable the cross-border flow of data between related parties? Our panel today is perfectly placed to answer these questions and your questions. Please enter questions in the chat function, and I'll try and do my best to make sure it gets answered by the most appropriate person. We've got four fabulous speakers, each of whom brings a unique perspective. Lara Kehoe Hoffman is the Global Director of Data Privacy and Security at Netflix. This is a business which provides highly personalized services to every single subscriber. No two Netflix customers see the same list, so it's a very data-rich company. She's Vice President of Privacy and Security Legal at Netflix, as well as the Global Data Protection Officer for the Netflix group of companies. She's been with Netflix since January 2015 and has built up the multinational privacy security legal team. In her personal time, she writes comedy, plays PC games, reads, and watches TV shows and movies. She's a first-generation American living in San Francisco. We're then going to cut to Barbara Cosgrove, who's the Vice President and Chief Privacy Officer at Workday, where she's worked for 15 years. Workday comes from a different perspective. It's a B2B organization. Barbara first built the privacy and security operations functions as the Chief Security Officer and later moved into the Chief Privacy Officer role to focus on further developing the company's privacy, ethics, and technical compliance programs. She helped create the company's privacy principles and led the company through its BCR processor, CBPR, PRP, and Cloud Code of Conduct certification processes. Her personal time is spent chasing after her 3-year-old son and 9-month-old puppy. Anna Zeiter is the Associate General Counsel and Chief Privacy Officer at eBay. She's based at eBay's international headquarters in Switzerland, where she's been DPO for the last 7.5 years. Anna trained as a lawyer in Germany and at Stanford University in California. In addition to carrying out the responsibilities as DPO and CPO for eBay, she teaches at several international universities and is a member of the IAPP Board of Directors. And if that wasn't enough to be getting on with, she's also just recently given birth to a baby girl. Takeshige Sugimoto is the Managing Director at S&K Brussels. He is a Japanese privacy attorney focusing on the EU GDPR, the UK GDPR, the US CCPA, CPRA, the Japan APPI, and China PIPL, and runs a small boutique privacy firm headquartered in Tokyo. And a unique perspective that Take is going to bring is that he offers in DPO services to organizations. He's a co-founder and director of Japan DPO Association, and he's successfully obtained EU BCR approvals from European supervisory authorities for Japanese clients and is working with the ICO on UK BCR applications for a client. So we're going to open with just a brief statement from each of the speakers, outlining their perspective on the challenges they face, the way their organization meets those challenges, and their role in assisting the organization. And we're going to begin with Lara. Lara, over to you. Lara, do we have, can you hear me? Oh.
Can everyone hear me all right? Great, thank you. Apologies to everyone, we're having a little bit of sound issues on our end. Thank you so much for the kind introduction. Lara Kehoe Hoffman, my pronouns are she, her, and hers. Really appreciate the opportunity to join everyone today. I'll speak a little bit first about Netflix. We are streaming in over 30 languages in over 190 countries. And we believe that great stories can come from anywhere and be loved anywhere. So some examples of that include Stranger Things, La Casa de Papel, Lupin, The Crown, and of course, Squid Game. We are an entertainment company where deep human expertise and machine learning techniques work hand in hand to create a personalized experience that is focused on helping you find content of interest to you. When you log into your Netflix account, as the commissioner mentioned earlier, and land on your homepage, you're only seeing the tip of the iceberg of a really vast and diverse catalog. There are thousands of movies and TV shows available for you to watch, and many of them are new stories that you won't be familiar with. So this means we need to find a way to help you discover content that will delight you and your nuanced and diverse tastes. So in order to do that, we make recommendations, and you choose and control what you want to watch. As we think about our recommendations, we want them to be accurate in that they are relevant. And they also need to be diverse so that we can address the spectrum of your interests as opposed to only focusing on one interest. We want to be able to highlight the depth in our catalog within your interests, but we also want to share the breadth of our catalog, and that will help you discover new interests. We want our recommendations to be fresh, and we want them to be responsive to the actions you take, such as watching a show or adding something to your list, or giving something a thumbs up or even a thumbs down. As data protection officers, we need to be an independent voice, a data subject focused advocate to tell the story of data protection within our own organizations and to help our organizations choose that story, data protection, again and again. We and our teams are responsible for understanding not only the current regulatory landscape, but how that's likely to change, and also what are and will be the additional expectations beyond regulations expected of our organization as it operates within the overall environment. We also need to understand our businesses, our organizations themselves. What is the company culture? What are the core goals? Who are the decision makers? Who are the influencers? And who does the implementation? We need to take these understandings and join them into digestible guidance for different parts of our organizations, but also to provide notices and choices and controls for the individuals whose personal data that we collect and use. So thank you again so much for having me join this great panel today. I'm excited to share our different data protection stories together and with you.
Thank you, Lara. Have we resolved all our audio problems? Can everybody hear?
You can.
Great. Well, we're going to move to Barbara now. Barbara, give us your observations. How is it different being a B2B business?
Sure. Thank you for having me here. I'm Barbara Cosgrove, Chief Privacy Officer at Workday. Workday is an enterprise provider of human resources, financial management, spending, planning, and analytics applications that are used by thousands of organizations globally and across industries. Workday acts as a data processor of that information. Our customers remain the data controller. And so in the DPO and the Chief Privacy Officer role, we're responsible for providing oversight internally and then figuring out how to translate that information for our customers. High standards of data privacy protections we see as being a market differentiator for companies. The more companies invest in privacy, the more trust our customers will have in goods and services they sell. So for an enterprise company like Workday, it's going to enhance our customer trust in our services. Privacy has always been part of our DNA from the beginning, and we really look to utilizing certifications, technical standards, third-party audits to provide tangible evidence of the lengths that we go through to keep our customers' data safe. That's how we can translate the internal oversight processes that we're building into controls that our customers can understand and have objective evidence of how we're providing that internal oversight. And so we were the first company to certify to Apex Privacy Recognition for Processors, to the European Cloud Code of Conduct. And we look for new mechanisms that we can build, controls that go across the globe, so we can demonstrate compliance across the globe. In addition, internally, as we're working with our teams, we really fall back on our core values. So when we're having those business conversations internally from the CPO or the DPO perspective, we really look to our core values and then 3 privacy principles that we've built out. And they're put privacy first, innovate responsibly, and safeguard fairness and trust. And so as we're making decisions, as we're guiding the business, we can look to those principles and have conversations with the business stakeholders that not only tie into certifications, into regulation, but also back to our company's core values and trust. And that makes those conversations so much easier to have versus just pointing at a regulation, to go back to something that we really believe in as a company, that we value as a company, and that we can have a good business discussion around. And so that is the foundation of our program. And how we've built it over the years. But looking forward to discussing more about it in detail here.
Thanks, Barbara. Can you help me out? I made notes. Your 3 sort of overarching privacy principles were put privacy first, innovate responsibly, and the 3rd one related to trust. Can you just remind me that one?
Sure, it's safeguard fairness and trust. So it's really looking at how we respect and protect the confidentiality of our customers' data, the privacy of the personal data, and how we demonstrate accountability through the third-party audits and certifications that I was talking about.
Thank you so much. Well, I think we're going to move, Anna, to you and to Switzerland. We have a very multinational meeting today, so as befitting the Global Privacy Authority. And I don't have any audio for you just yet. Perhaps you could hop into the text, into the chat, and discuss with our technical advisors. And I might move to Take while you do that, and we'll come back to you. Take, are you ready to step into the breach?
Yes, of course. So thank you very much for the introduction. My name is Takeshige Sugimoto. I'm a data protection specialist based in Tokyo, Japan. I feel extremely honored to be invited to join this panel. I believe I'm the only external DPO on this panel, and so I'd like to take this opportunity to contribute to this panel by sharing my observations and experiences as an external DPO. To start off, I'd like to make a few remarks on the roles of DPOs based on my experience as a DPO. First, DPOs are at the heart of the global data protection regime for many organizations, facilitating compliance with the provision of each data protection law in the world. As the Article 29 Working Party rightly argued before the adoption of the GDPR, it is undeniable that the DPO is a cornerstone of accountability and that appointing a DPO can facilitate compliance and furthermore become a competitive advantage for businesses. Second, such roles of DPOs have been achieved so far in many organizations because it is ensured that DPOs are able to perform their tasks with a sufficient degree of autonomy within their organization, and that the DPOs, whether or not they are an employee of the controller or processor, are in a position to perform their duties and tasks in an independent manner. Third, as a future proof, I believe that the roles of DPOs will only be expanded even more dramatically across wider jurisdictions and not the other way around. For instance, China has just introduced the obligation to appoint a personal information protection officer into their new China PIPL. And in the US, both Democrat and Republican Senates have been working together to adopt a comprehensive federal data privacy law in Congress. In both the US Federal Privacy Bill, COPRA, and Republican Safe Data Act, there appears to be an agreement between both parties to introduce obligations to appoint a data privacy officer into future US federal privacy law. Fourth, I'd like to emphasize the significant skills, experience, and professionalism that DPOs can bring. The DPO role under GDPR has also enabled more effective provision of independent advice within organization and visibility in corporate governance at board level. Last but not least, DPOs across the globe can work together as colleagues of relevant stakeholders, such as supervisory authorities, data subjects, and business units within an organization. DPOs can act as intermediaries among those stakeholders to help each stakeholder understand how the other stakeholders feel about certain processing of personal data in order to fill in the gaps among them to further promote data protection. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Take. Very interesting. And I'm sure there'll be lots of questions for you about managing such a complex role across so many jurisdictions and for so many different kind of enterprises. Anna, I think we've resolved your audio problems.
Perfect. Thank you, Commissioner. Thank you for the invite. So I'm actually the Chief Privacy Officer and the Data Protection Officer of eBay. I assume that most of you know eBay, the online marketplace. So we're actually connecting sellers and buyers around the globe. And as you can imagine, the international data transfers are the basis and the foundation of our business model. We have a huge database or customer base in the Americas, in Europe, and also in Asia. And I'm as the DPO based in Switzerland, which might be a bit unusual, but we have our international headquarter actually based in Bern. Some specifics around eBay and privacy is that eBay was actually the first Silicon Valley company that implemented binding corporate rules already back in 2009. So we have two sets of binding corporate rules for employee data and for user data, which means that we already had a very good foundation when we implemented GDPR in the years 2016 and 2017. And since then, so as you can imagine, our global privacy program is based on GDPR since we have binding corporate rules in place and we already had to comply with European privacy standards, 10 or 12 years ago. So GDPR is the basis. And whenever we see a new law applies to us, like CCPA, in the future, CPRA, LGPD, people in that to the program, which means we follow a very high watermark approach when it comes to privacy globally. I'm actually the DPO and the CPO at the same time. I'm reporting to the Chief Compliance Officer, who is reporting to the General Counsel. And on the regional level, I have a dotted line to regional general managers to make sure that I report to the board of directors on the local level and report to them any privacy updates on a quarterly basis. When it comes to the position of the DPO, I once heard a European regulator saying a DPO is a Swiss Army knife. It's a multifunctional tool. And I think this is probably the reason why eBay's DPO is based in Switzerland. No, jokes aside. So I think, as you can imagine, DPO needs several qualifications, expertise in the privacy field, but also a DPO needs to be a good communicator. And I think the most important thing is a DPO needs to have a strong character, because a DPO needs to be able to say no at one point, tell the CEO, this is something we have to do, and this is something we probably stop doing. And this is why it's important that the DPO is high in the hierarchy And because, as you know, especially in Europe, the DPO has a veto right, and this is why the DPO needs to have a strong character. Because he or she needs to be able to draw a red line when it comes to new regulations, something that a company needs to do or needs to stop doing. So this is, once again, a multifunctional tool, DPO being in Switzerland, and happy to answer more in-depth questions on the DPO role.
I think we may be having some technical difficulties again. Maybe I can jump in with where our DPO org structure fits while they get sorted out, because I think that's an interesting one, Anna. I'm the Chief Privacy Officer and based in our U.S. headquarters, California, and our DPO is based in our European headquarters in Ireland and reports into me. But we are set up as an independent office within the organization and report up to our general counsel. Our DPO Fabrizio Petrelli has a dotted line report to our general counsel too, but we also, similar to you, we make sure that we're doing a full report out to our complete board of directors on an annual basis so that we're also providing oversight at that level. But we've set ourselves up so that we can provide that oversight across the organization, and it felt like reporting into the general counsel gave us that independence in the organization.
And I'll jump in as well. Similarly, we are part of the legal department, and that gives us a certain amount of objectivity and independence as we come into conversations and we roll up to the general counsel. We have a matrixed organization. So just by way of example, our EMEA lead reports to me, but also reports to our director of our main entity in Europe. And we do this partially to make sure that information is flowing really robustly within the organization, and that local voices, regional voices, are being heard at important levels, including on issues like data protection. Oh, and we've got the commissioner back, I think.
Hi, thank you. I don't know what happened there, and sorry, Anna, I missed out, but you've taken over and are chatting amongst yourselves. Tell me where we've got to, Lara.
We were chatting about where we sit in the organization.
Oh, good. Well, I was going to ask that, so that's very serendipitous. Did you get around the room? Has everybody answered that question?
The in-house folks did, yes. But Take didn't get a chance to speak from his perspective.
Right. Well, we know where Take sits. He's inside the organization. And I have a question about that, because I wonder what the panel's thoughts are on the merits of having external DPO assistance versus having that fully in-house. Take, I'll go to you first, because obviously you have a strong belief in the value that you can bring. What are the advantages and disadvantages of contracting out that service? And can you do it in all jurisdictions?
Sure. So I think as an external DPO, we can be more, I think, in practice, independent, from the organization to which we advise. So, for instance, if we really think that data protection impact assessment is necessary, and we can say, without any hesitation, while I imagine that the internal data protection officer, sometimes have a kind of hesitation to say that because of the relationship with the other department. But on the other hand, as an external DPO has a challenge, in case that, the client, which is, the organized controller is unhappy about our kind of conservative advice on DPIAs or other, data protection obligations. So even though external DPO is, how can I say, qualified, to the independency under the GDPR, but in fact, we do not, how can I say, enforce such independence, by, litigating, in case, we are, our service agreement, as a DPO is canceled. So, with that, I think internal DPO can, really, forceful, in case, you really need to stop some problematic data processing activities.
Maybe I can add on that, Take. I think there are pros and cons for having an internal or an external DPO. So usually I think I would prefer internal DPOs because they usually have more knowledge about the organization. They know all the stakeholders. But there are situations in which I also prefer or we use external DPOs. And this is what we currently have with me, for example, because I'm officially on maternity leave. And we ask our main regulator in Germany, so what can we do during my maternity leave? Is 3 months maternity leave, something we can bridge, or I'm available? And then our regulator said, no, for a period of 3 months, you need to appoint another DPO. And for this situation, we just appointed a couple of weeks ago an external DPO, someone from a law firm, but someone who knows eBay very well. So this is also an opportunity where I think companies can use that wisely, in which situations they appoint internal and external DPOs. So, and also, for example, if you have in one jurisdiction nobody available with jurisdiction knowledge, I think an external DPO could be very beneficial. But I think the critical part is that the DPO, either it's internal or external, need to be connected with the main decision makers, and especially with the people who have knowledge about the data processing activities. Otherwise, the external DPO cannot fulfill his or her duties properly.
Thank you. I'm back with you. I'm having a bit of trouble. Must be just my end, I suppose. Did you, Barbara, did you express an opinion on the question of internal versus external DPOs?
I have not yet. Happy to jump in. I agree with everything the folks before me have said. I do think there's an advantage to having an internal DPO that truly knows the business, understands, in our case, the product suite, the technology, so that they can make an informed decision, that they understand how things work, and that they have those relationships with the business. I especially would see an advantage in terms of using an external DPO for a smaller company. I mean, I think as you're a small company, you may not have as much of an ability to have that independence and to guide, and to have somebody who's really set up in that role that can meet the DPO function and have the background that really understands legal aspects, understands the regulations that apply to you, understands technology, understands compliance. And so I see advantages for smaller, mid-sized companies to be using DPOs especially, and then also in cases like Anna said, to supplement where you may need additional expertise as you're looking around the globe. But for a large company, if you can set up an office of the CPO, DPO, and have assistant DPOs perhaps that can help guide, I do think there's a lot of value to having those internal relationships and deeper knowledge of the technologies that you're using as a company.
Thank you. Lara, did you already make a contribution on this?
I didn't, but honestly, I don't think I have anything additive. I agree with everything that's been said so far.
Sure. Okay. Thank you. Look, I have a question, which is, how easy is it to say no? How much support do you get to say no when a new product, to the engineer, to the board, when you think that there's a serious issue with the product? How do you deal with that?
Maybe I can, if you don't mind, I can go first. So I think I only use that very few times in my career. And usually when you explain to the business, hey, we want to do the right thing as a company. We have privacy in our DNA. We were one of the first movers in Silicon Valley to have binding corporate rules in place. We want to do the right thing. So usually it's pretty easy to convince the business, and sometimes now I have a bit of an echo. Okay, now it's gone. But you need arguments, right? You need to explain to the business. Sometimes they don't understand the full picture. They don't understand what it could mean to user trust. But usually after an honest conversation, the business usually say, okay, totally makes sense. What can we do to implement this functionality, this product in a compliant way? And I would say in 98% of the use cases, you always find a solution where you can implement something, launch something in a compliant way without harming the business or without changing the product so much. I think user trust is the main or the key consideration. We want to do the right thing. We want to maintain the user trust because users are usually very well educated, especially since a couple of years after GDPR came into force, CCPA, DPRA is coming into force very soon. So users are very well educated around the globe and they know their rights. So this is something we have to keep in mind, and user trust is the key consideration. And of course, besides that, no company would like to end up in the media with reputational damage or get a big fine. But this is only, I would say, a secondary thought. The key consideration is always we would like to maintain and build up even more user trust.
Lara, have you ever had to say no? That's probably an unfair question, but how do you deal with those difficult conversations?
I think dealing with difficult conversations is an absolutely fair question. I think there are a lot of steps as a DPO before you have to get to a no. And I agree with Anna. I think a lot of it is providing context. But there's also not necessarily a clear black and white yes or no. And so sometimes what we have to do as data protection officers is help the business navigate in gray areas. And so that's why having the touchstones are really, really important. So using data for your members, using data in beneficial ways and not in harmful ways, right? Whatever your company's or organization's touchstones are, you need to go back to those. And then the question becomes, we're in a gray space. Would our use or failure to use data in this instance be beneficial? Does it match to our touchstones, or does it move away from those? And very often, if you couch the conversation in those terms, you don't even need to get to know, because you make it more about the core business goals, as opposed to viewing it as a strict regulatory. And frankly, you're better off looking at whether the member experience, whether the individual experience is going to benefit from this. And if you have a clear answer there, then almost 10 times out of 10, that's your answer.
Thank you. Take, if you say no to a client, does that translate as goodbye?
No, I don't necessarily think so, because when I say no, I will of course engage with different departments in addition to data protection department. So first of all, I already explained the significance of the data protection.
Au revoir. Non.
We have dropped Taki. Oh,
yeah, I'm back. Sorry. Oh.
You morphed into Jean-Philippe Walter for a moment.
Yeah, I'm back. Sorry about that. So yeah, basically, even if I say no, client engage with me and discuss the alternatives. So that's my.
Thank you, Take. Barbara, do you want to comment on that?
Sure. I think one of the best ways to be successful if you have to say no is to make sure that you're doing it early, that you really have good privacy by design processes built in. So either you're consulting early, you haven't had a team go and build an entire product suite, develop it, and then as it's about to go out the door, you're the blocker. You've been able to consult early on, advise early on. And if there is a no there, that you've been able to guide before resources, hours, money has been spent on it. So I think that's one of the keys to being successful as the DPO, is making sure you have those checkpoints into early on, looking at risks, and then having checkpoints along the way so that you haven't had folks waste a whole lot of time, because it's much more difficult discussion at that point.
Yeah. So kind of no surprises.
Maybe I can add on that.
Yeah, please
maybe I can add on that. Usually it's not a no maybe it's in most of the cases it's more like a, hey, we can make it a bit more, we can change it a bit, we can change the approach, we can add this, we can add this information, we can add this notice. So usually it's not a no. Maybe it's, in most of the cases, more, let's improve the situation a bit, let's improve notice and choice, let's add a consent, let's make the consent language clearer. So usually it's not a no. Usually it's something like, let's make it a bit better.
Thank you. I'd like to move to another aspect of compliance. There is an audience question which I'll come to, but when we had our preparatory call, I think it was both eBay and Netflix, which said that your approach to operating in multiple jurisdictions is to apply the highest standard. So the tide rises for the least regulated community, and they get the benefits of the most regulated. I wanted just to touch on that and to see how that works, whether that can be a business disadvantage in those less regulated jurisdictions. And not all companies do it. For example, Google, Europe enjoys the right to be forgotten, as do other jurisdictions, but it's not something that Google has made a foundation of its platform elsewhere in the world. So someone in New Zealand, for example, can't assert a right to be forgotten against Google and have links broken or information deleted. Can I go to you first on this point, Lara?
Sure. So I think I'm going to indirectly pick up on the point you just made, in the sense that you need to look at your company's business model and take a look at how is that going to be implemented as you move internationally and multinationally. In our case, we have, for example, always provided all of our members with the core data subject rights and responses to those. So I'll give you a very specific example of the subject access request right. We have an automated tool that is available to our members everywhere in the world, even though technically in many jurisdictions there's no subject access right that could legally be asserted against us. But we made a decision a very long time ago that we were going to treat our members the same. And so everybody gets that. There are other ways in which we operate slightly differently, and sometimes that comes into play with very specific local requirements. So I'll use the example of our privacy statement. The core of our privacy statement is the same everywhere, but in some places there are very specific disclosures that we're required to make. A good example is in the United States, under the CCPA in California. There are very specific disclosures we're required to make that make sense in the context of the CCPA, but wouldn't necessarily translate well, for lack of a better term, in the EEA. So we keep those specific disclosures in the US version of the privacy statement. And then there are other disclosures that are GDPR specific that we might make in our EU privacy statements. So it's really being thoughtful about combining, frankly, being fair to individuals. And frankly, in some cases, there's efficiency for the business. Rather than have multiple bespoke subject access request tools, we have one tool that's available to everyone, and everything is downloadable in machine readable format. So that means we are addressing both the subject access right and the data portability right simultaneously, even though those might be separated or conjoined under different schemas.
Thank you. There's obviously great efficiencies in having a single approach. Barbara, is that what you achieved with the binding corporate rules?
Yeah, we have binding corporate rules for processors, and so that does help us, especially if we look at also having the PRP framework for APEC. We're able to build out a global program that meets GDPR, but also meets the controls around the world as we're looking at it. But when we look to how we serve our customers, also, we're building our product so that it's configurable so that they're able to meet their various privacy requirements around the globe, which means that as we build out our features that help our customers with GDPR, you don't have to have workforce in Europe to be using that. You can take advantage and use it anywhere you're located. And so being able to build that into the product, our customers decide where they want to be able to take advantage of those features, where they want to be able to use it, and make those decisions on their own.
Thank you. Thank you. Anna, do you want to comment on that?
Yeah, happy to. So maybe two things from our side. So as I said, we have controller BCRs in place since 2009, which means we have to comply with European privacy standards, which means with GDPR anyway, globally, because we have the BCRs for user data and for employee data in place. So that means we anyway have a pretty high standard globally. And whenever we see new laws coming up or popping up around the globe, I mean, they're popping up around the globe almost on a weekly basis, then we check, hey, are they stricter than GDPR or less strict? And in some cases, I can give you an example. We had it last year with LGPD in Brazil, that we realized that some of the user rights under LGPD, I mean, the user rights themselves, they're pretty similar, but the deadlines to answer them or to respond to them are a bit shorter. So some of the user rights, you have to answer them in 2 weeks instead of 30 days. So, and then we decided, as Lara explained, from an efficiency perspective, we thought it doesn't make sense to have two, subject access request tools in place, one for rest of the world and one for Brazil. And this is why we decided, hey, let's change the process and let's try to answer all subject access requests globally within 2 weeks. That serves the customer because they're happy because they received the answers a bit earlier, and it's compliant with Brazilian privacy law. So, and this is what we try to do whenever we see a new law coming up around the globe, which is stricter than GDPR, and some of the CCPA requirements are stricter, and even some of the CPIA requirements are stricter. We add that to the global privacy program because in most of the cases, it's more efficient to have it baked into one global program than coming up with algorithms which say, okay, this is a Brazilian user or it's a European-based user who is on holidays in Brazil buying a pair of sneakers in the US, which law applies, ? So in those situations, we're like, okay, let's apply high watermark standard. It serves everyone, not only the user, but also us because it's easier and it's simpler.
Thank you. Taki, you're also advising clients operating in multiple jurisdictions. What advice do you give?
Yes, I fully agree with Anna's approach because Japanese companies are basically very much concerned about extraterritorial application of EU GDPR or Brazilian LGPD or Thai PDPA and so forth. So it is actually efficient for most of my clients to set a high watermark to build up their compliance program.
Thank you. I'll move to the question that's come in from the audience. The question is, DPOs are absolutely crucial to promote compliance. DPO requirement in GDPR has been the game changer in EU and UK. What can regulators do to better support DPOs in their role? And that's a question that I haven't planted there myself, but it's one I'm very interested in hearing your advice on as I take up a role in an organization responsible for overseeing laws that many of you are subject to.
I'm happy to jump in.
Okay, Lara, thank you.
Sorry. Communication is so essential. I think having really healthy communication and information flow between data protection authorities and data protection officers helps both sides because it helps us understand each other. It helps us avoid unintended consequences of actions on either side or failure to act on either side. And really, it helps us both be efficient because we all have limited resources at the end of the day, and we want to be applying those resources to the benefit of data subjects for business reasons and for regulatory reasons. So we're teammates in a lot of ways in creating an environment in which we can both operate and thrive.
Thank you. There
Maybe
are
two
some out
things
there, I'm
from my
sure, who are
end.
thinking we're not teammates, but there is a delicate balance, isn't there, between the regulator offering assistance and trying to make compliance as easy and painless and frictionless as possible, but also having to patrol that boundary. Anna, did you want to jump in there?
Yeah, I wanted to say say two things. What we experience with our regulators in Europe, so we have several or some regulators in Germany, in Europe for different entities. That users sometimes come up with similar questions or complaints. And we appreciate very much a close relationship with our main regulators in Europe, because then we can provide the regulator with more context, with more background, to answer specific complaints and questions from users. But on the other side, it also gives us good insights, because when we see we receive multiple complaints and questions about this functionality, that gives good feedback to us, so that we understand, oh, maybe we should add more information, an information bubble, a better or clearer notice. So I think it's a give and take. And I think, okay, we are maybe not teammates, but I would say the DPO is actually the longer arm of the regulator within the company. So, and this is why I think it's good to have a good and close connection to understand what's on top of their mind, how we can help the regulator to fulfill their duties, for example, to answer users in time efficiently, and also to help us internally to streamline processes, maybe to change or improve processes, informations, notifications, for example. And then maybe one other thing, I heard that one European regulator set up a kind of network meetings for DPOs. This is something I found very interesting when I heard that recently. I know that not all European regulators have that in place. Maybe this is some interesting idea to connect with peers who are regulated under the same regulator in the same jurisdiction, in the same region. Maybe that might be interesting. These were the two cents from my side.
Thank you very much. That's very helpful. Barbara.
Yeah, if I could start, just jump in really quickly. I'm going to retract the teammates. I do apologize. That's too far, but I'll amend it to collaborate, which doesn't require teammates, but definitely we're collaborators.
I would say if we look to GDPR envisioned the use of certifications and codes of conduct as a means of demonstrating compliance. And so I do think regulators could help support DPOs by looking at ways to help get those across the finish line, especially from the B2B perspective, looking at certifications as a complement to regulations. They can help in terms of being able to demonstrate compliance across a broad spectrum of customers. And so helping to make sure we have more approved codes of conduct, like the Cloud Code of Conduct, or ways of demonstrating compliance through certifications, I think helps not only the DPO in being able to show companies internally how you can measure and build controls out, helps demonstrate compliance to customers, but in the long term helps the regulators too, because you're going to be able to see objective evidence of what companies are doing in terms of compliance efforts. So anything that the regulators can do to help us continue to get those approved would be wonderful.
Thank you. Taki, what do you think? Taki,
I think networking idea for DPOs would be brilliant. And I think for small organization DPOs, it would be very helpful if the regulators can prepare for some frequently asked questions coming up in such a networking meeting. Because even small organization, if those organizations is a public authorities, then the DPO is appointing a DPO is mandatory. But then it's very difficult sometimes to get the necessary resource to implement compliance program. So I think a FAQ can be a great resource for DPOs for small organizations.
Thank you. That's very helpful. How has the lead supervisory authority process been working? Is that efficient and effective? What's been your experience of that just in the last few minutes? And I take that as a lead on from the last question. Are there things that DPOs need to do to coordinate with each other to reduce the compliance burden? Anna, do you want to start us with that?
Yeah, I could. So I have the impression it's working, but it takes a lot of time. But this is, of course, understandable because I assume, I mean, there's translation work included. The lead authority has to reach out to other affected authorities. It usually takes time. And this is something which is sometimes a bit burdensome from a company perspective, but it's totally understandable. But I see that the process is improving and that decisions are being reached in a faster way. And I mean, from my perspective, it's important for companies to have clarity on, interpretations of GDPR in Europe, because most of the companies or all of the companies that are here in the room, they're acting in Europe, not only in specific countries, but, across the European continent. And so it's important for us to have one clear or one voice, like, hey, for example, cookie banners should look like this. Or legitimate interest is this, and this. Because for us, it's burdensome sometimes to figure out, okay, in this country, the interpretation of GDPR is this, there's another guidance of the authority in this country, which of course means a lot of research effort for us. And then legal clarity. Of course, we want to be compliant, but it's sometimes difficult because guidances from authorities are sometimes not consistent, they're slightly different, and sometimes really the devil is in the detail. And then you have to engage law firms which try to find out which is the approach which is compliant with all the different guidances across Europe. I assume, or I see, that this is a huge effort and a huge challenge for all the European regulators, because there is no one single European privacy regulator. There are multiple, 27 member states, and even in some member states, like in Germany, we have multiple state regulators. It's difficult to bring all of them on the same page in an efficient and fast way. But this is a bit of a challenge from a company perspective, but I see that regulators doing a big effort and are super professional to face this challenge and to become faster and faster and more efficient in this respect.
Thank you for that. The ticker is winding down to 2:28. Barbara, do you have any closing comments or one hot tip that you'd like to leave with your colleagues who might be struggling, how to improve their practice, how to get the ear of the chief executive? What do you think is the most essential characteristic of a successful DPO?
The most essential characteristic is to be a good listener and to learn to understand the business and build those relationships so that you can be a trusted partner in advising. I think coming in and just trying to say this is what the law is, it will work, but you're not going to be as successful as if you've learned the business and you really can have a trusted dialogue and a continuing relationship. So to me, that would be it. Form a partnership, look at it as a partnership so that you can be a trusted advisor.
Perfect. Thank you. Learn the business. Lara, a last hot tip for DPOs that are watching.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I agree with everything Barbara just said. And I think having your touchstones that you return to time again, it's going to help you focus your thinking and your approach. And it's also going to help keep the business focused.
Thank you. The touchstones, such as the three high-level principles that Barbara mentioned in her presentation, always go back to those: the value, the trust. Taki.
I think it would be beneficial for the DPOs to share the experiences, like this kind of forum, to build up a community for DPOs to help each other.
Don't be alone. Thank you.
Yeah.
Anna?
A multifunctional tool like the Swiss Army knife, being a very good communicator and being connected with stakeholders in the company. It was easier before the COVID pandemic because, you could travel, you can meet people in the office. That was a bit of a challenge during the pandemic because you need to reach out to people proactively. But I think over the time, I learned to keep my great network during the pandemic. But I think this is
Networking,
essential to be
excellent. I'll
connected.
stop you there. I'm good.
And okay.
Thanks. I get it. Connected. I have 10 seconds. I want to thank you very much. I want to thank the audience, but especially our hosts, Enai, for bringing together such an expert panel to inform all DPOs out there. Thank you so much.